For 20 years, one hangar stayed locked while the rest of the airfield slowly faded into history. No employee was allowed inside. No inspections. No questions. Just one order from the CEO. Never touch the aircraft in Hangar 9. Most people assumed it was hiding a priceless collector's plane, or a dangerous secret that could never be revealed. Then everything changed because of one exhausted single father who was simply trying to keep his job. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't chasing a mystery. But one cold morning with no one watching, he climbed into the forgotten cockpit and turned the key. What happened next stunned everyone who heard the engine come to life for the first time in 2 decades. The truth behind that locked hangar wasn't what anyone expected. And once the CEO arrived, the story took a turn that nobody at the airport could have imagined. Stay with me, because every clue matters, and by the end, you'll understand why one simple decision changed several lives forever. Daniel Harper had worked at West Ridge Airfield for just over 6 months. Every day looked the same. Old cargo planes came and went. Mechanics joked over cups of strong coffee. Forklifts rattled across the concrete. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. And for Daniel, that was all that mattered. 3 years earlier, he had lost his wife to a sudden illness. Since then, every morning began before sunrise. He made breakfast for his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, walked her to the school bus, then drove 40 minutes to the airfield. His life had become a routine built on responsibility, not dreams. There was one place, however, that never fit into that routine. Hangar 9. It stood at the far edge of the property, away from the busy maintenance bays. Its steel doors were faded. The windows were covered from the inside. Even the grass around it seemed untouched. Nobody parked nearby. Nobody took shortcuts past it. The mechanics avoided looking at it altogether. On Daniel's first day, he casually asked one of the senior technicians, "What's inside?" The man's smile disappeared. "Forget you ever asked." At first, Daniel laughed. He assumed they were playing some old workplace prank. But the longer he worked there, the stranger it became. Whenever deliveries arrived, every building was opened. Except Hangar 9. Whenever inspectors visited, every aircraft was documented. Except whatever rested behind those locked doors. Even the cleaning crews skipped the building completely. One rainy afternoon, Daniel noticed something unusual. The CEO himself arrived without security. No announcement. No entourage. Just one black sedan. He unlocked Hangar 9 alone. Stepped inside. Closed the door behind him. Exactly 12 minutes later, he walked out again. His face looked pale. Not angry. Not relieved. Almost emotional. Then he locked the doors again and drove away. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would the CEO personally visit an abandoned aircraft? Why only for a few minutes? And why did every employee pretend it had never happened? The questions grew heavier with every passing week. Then one evening, while organizing old maintenance records, Daniel accidentally found a dusty logbook hidden beneath a stack of obsolete manuals. Almost every page had been removed. Only one remained. Across the top, written in faded ink, were 4 words. Do not start engine. No aircraft registration. No signature. No explanation. Just those 4 chilling words. His heartbeat quickened. Who tears out every page, but leaves behind the warning? Before he could study it further, footsteps echoed through the office. Daniel quickly slipped the page back into the folder. The supervisor walked in, glanced at him, then quietly picked up the same logbook. For a brief second, their eyes met. The supervisor's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he knew exactly what Daniel had seen. Without saying a single word, he carried the logbook away. The very next morning, Daniel checked the archive shelves. The file was gone. Every record connected to Hangar 9 had vanished. almost as if someone had been waiting for anyone curious enough to look. Daniel tried convincing himself to let it go. He needed the paycheck. Emma needed stability. Some doors stayed closed for good reasons. But fate has a strange way of ignoring common sense. Late one Friday, a violent storm rolled across the airfield. Power flickered. Winds howled hard enough to shake the hangars. Emergency crews rushed to secure equipment before anything could be damaged. In the chaos, a maintenance truck skidded across the wet pavement and slammed into the electronic control box beside Hangar 9. Sparks exploded. The security system died instantly. A loud metallic click echoed through the rain. One of the massive hangar doors slowly rolled open. Just a few inches. No alarms. No guards. Only darkness waiting inside. Daniel froze. From where he stood, he could just make out the polished nose of an aircraft that looked as though it had been cleaned yesterday, not 20 years ago. And then something impossible caught his eye. A faint green light blinked once. Inside the cockpit. There shouldn't have been any electricity. There shouldn't have been anyone inside. Yet the light blinked again. Slow. Steady. Almost as if the forgotten plane had been waiting all these years for someone to notice it. The storm swallowed every sound except the wind. Daniel stared at the narrow opening in Hangar 9. His first instinct was to walk away. If someone discovered him near the hangar, he could lose everything. But something didn't make sense. That green light. Aircraft batteries don't quietly survive 20 years without maintenance. Someone had either been inside recently, or the plane wasn't as abandoned as everyone believed. He pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam slipped through the gap. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars. Yet the floor told a different story. There were almost no footprints. No thick layer of dirt. No rust. Whoever cared for this aircraft had done it carefully enough to leave almost no trace. Daniel pushed the heavy door just wide enough to step inside. The air smelled strange. Not mold. Not old fuel. Fresh engine oil. His pulse quickened. Parked beneath the dim emergency lights stood one of the most beautiful aircraft he had ever seen. Its polished aluminum reflected the flashlight. The paint looked untouched. Even the tires appeared properly inflated. It was as if someone had frozen time inside the hangar. He slowly circled the aircraft. Then he noticed something that made him stop. There wasn't a single company logo anywhere. No airline markings. No military insignia. No registration number. It was almost as though the plane had been erased from history. A clipboard rested on a nearby workbench. The pages were blank. Except for one handwritten sentence. Some promises are worth more than fortunes. Daniel frowned. What kind of maintenance note was that? Before he could think any further, a small voice broke the silence. Daddy. Daniel spun around so quickly he nearly dropped his flashlight. Emma stood in the doorway. His heart nearly stopped. She had been asleep at the office lounge while he finished overtime. When the storm knocked out the power, she'd woken up and gone looking for him. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "I was scared." He rushed over and hugged her tightly. Nothing mattered more than getting her somewhere safe. But as they turned to leave, Emma looked back at the aircraft. "That plane is pretty." Then she pointed toward the cockpit. "Who's the old man?" Daniel felt every muscle in his body tense. "What old man?" She pointed again. "He's sitting by the window." Daniel slowly raised his flashlight. The cockpit was empty. Every seat. Every control. Nothing. He looked back at Emma. "There isn't anyone there." Emma frowned. There was. A cold silence settled over the hangar. Children sometimes imagine things. Daniel knew that. At least. That's what he wanted to believe. Just then, a metallic click echoed from inside the cockpit. Neither of them had touched the aircraft. A single overhead instrument flickered to life. One tiny amber light. Then another. The dashboard began glowing one switch at a time. No engine. No external power. Nothing connected. Daniel instinctively stepped backward, shielding Emma behind him. Then the aircraft speakers crackled with heavy static. A voice emerged. Broken. Weak. Almost impossible to understand. Authorization. Static. Confirmed. Then silence. Daniel's breathing became shallow. Someone had to be controlling this. It was the only logical explanation. He hurried outside, expecting to see security vehicles racing toward the hangar. There were none. The storm had emptied the entire airfield. When he looked back inside, every light on the aircraft had gone dark again, as if nothing had happened. Emma tugged gently on his sleeve. "Daddy. What is it?" She pointed beneath the nose wheel. There wasn't a box there before. Daniel shined his flashlight. A small metal case rested on the concrete. He was certain it hadn't been there moments earlier. Rainwater hadn't touched it. Dust hadn't settled on it. It looked newly placed. His hands trembled as he lifted the latch. Inside was a single leather journal. No title. No owner's name. Just one folded photograph. Daniel unfolded it carefully. The picture showed the very same aircraft. But what froze him wasn't the plane. Standing beside it was a much younger version of the CEO, smiling with another man whose face had been deliberately cut out of the photograph. Only one hand remained visible. On that hand was a distinctive silver ring shaped like an eagle. Daniel stared at it for several seconds. He had seen that exact ring before. Not years ago. Not in an old photograph. Earlier that very morning. On the hand of the quiet janitor everyone ignored. The same elderly man who swept the hangars every night. And who always paused for a few silent moments outside Hangar 9 before walking away. Daniel barely slept that night. The photograph remained on his kitchen table long after Emma had gone to bed. He couldn't stop looking at the silver eagle ring. It was too unusual to be a coincidence. Early the next morning, he arrived at the airfield before sunrise. The grounds were quiet. Only one person was already working. The elderly janitor. He slowly pushed his broom across the concrete, humming a tune that sounded older than the airport itself. Daniel walked toward him. "I'm sorry to bother you." The old man smiled politely. "No bother at all." Daniel pulled the photograph from his pocket. The moment the janitor saw it, his smile disappeared. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, the janitor let out a slow breath. "I wondered when someone would find that." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Were you there?" The old man looked toward Hangar 9. "I was." He lifted his weathered hand. The silver eagle ring caught the morning sunlight. "I wasn't the janitor then." Daniel waited. "I was the pilot." Those 4 words hit harder than anything Daniel had imagined. The old man introduced himself as Samuel Brooks. 20 years earlier, he had flown experimental aircraft for the company. Not military. Not commercial. They tested advanced emergency aviation systems designed to keep aircraft controllable during complete mechanical failure. The project had attracted enormous investors. If it succeeded, it would change aviation forever. If it failed, everything would collapse. One demonstration flight changed everything. A critical system malfunctioned moments after takeoff. Samuel managed to land safely. No one was injured. But the investors fled. The company lost millions overnight. The board demanded someone take the blame. Daniel frowned. "The CEO blamed you?" Samuel slowly shook his head. "No. He blamed himself." Daniel looked confused. Samuel continued. "The failure wasn't mine. It wasn't the engineers. It wasn't the aircraft. The CEO had personally ordered the test to happen weeks earlier than planned because investors wanted quick results. Silence settled between them. He spent 20 years believing that one rushed decision nearly cost innocent lives. Daniel looked toward Hangar 9. So he locked the plane away? Samuel nodded. Not to hide the aircraft. To remind himself. Daniel had expected greed. Corruption. A crime. Instead, he found something far more human. A burden carried for 2 decades. Just then, a black sedan rolled slowly across the tarmac. The CEO stepped out. For the first time, Daniel saw no authority in his face. Only exhaustion. He looked at Samuel. I hoped you'd never have to see that plane again. Samuel gave a quiet smile. You locked away an airplane. You never locked away the past. The CEO lowered his head. I couldn't forgive myself. Samuel took a few slow steps toward Hangar 9. Neither could I. Daniel watched the 2 elderly men stand in silence. 20 years of regret separated by only a few feet. Then Samuel reached into his pocket. He removed a small brass key. I've carried this every day. Daniel looked puzzled. The ignition key. Samuel nodded. I kept it because I wasn't ready. He placed it into the CEO's hand. Today I am. Without another word, they walked together into Hangar 9. Daniel followed quietly. The aircraft sat exactly as before. Still elegant. Still waiting. Samuel climbed into the pilot's seat one final time. His hands rested gently on the controls. The CEO stood beside him. Neither man spoke. Samuel inserted the key. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he turned it. The starter engaged. Once. Twice. The engine coughed. A deep rumble filled the hangar. The propeller began turning. Slowly at first. Then smoothly. The forgotten aircraft came alive. Not with violence. Not with drama. With dignity. The sound echoed through every corner of the building. Several employees rushed toward the hangar, expecting disaster. Instead, they stopped in complete silence. Some removed their caps. Others simply stared. Many had worked there for years without ever knowing why the aircraft had been hidden. The CEO wiped tears from his eyes. I thought locking the doors would silence my mistake. Samuel gently shut the engine down. It only kept the wound from healing. The hangar became quiet again. But this silence felt different. It wasn't built on fear anymore. It was built on acceptance. A few weeks later, Hangar 9 reopened. Not as a forbidden place, but as a small museum honoring the people who had learned that leadership isn't about pretending you've never failed. It's about having the courage to face the truth. Visitors often stopped in front of the polished aircraft. Many admired its design. Few knew its real story. Near the entrance stood a simple bronze plaque. No long speech. No list of achievements. Only one sentence. Some promises are worth more than fortunes. Daniel brought Emma there on opening day. She looked up at the airplane and smiled. So it's not a scary plane anymore. Daniel squeezed her hand. No, it never was. Sometimes the heaviest doors are locked by guilt, not steel. And sometimes, all it takes to open them isn't extraordinary strength. It's one ordinary person willing to turn the key.